Hello, and welcome to this edition of Leaders in Transformation, a series dedicated to those who are successful in leading our adoptions and transformations. It's no secret that we've been failing for over a decade, and we continue to fail even though we know the path forward. So that's why we've created this series dedicated to bringing you the insights and demystify what and how you can succeed with your adoption and transformation.
Hi, my name is Rick Paderhorst. I'm CEO of DASA, and one of my core passions is building high-performance digital organizations. And this is a passion I share with the guest we have on the show today, Gene Kim. Allow me to introduce Gene. Gene has been studying high-performing technology organizations since 1999. He was the founder and CTO of Tripwire Inc. for 13 years, an enterprise security software firm. Gene's books have sold over 1 million copies. He's a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, most recently co-authored Wiring the Winning Organization, as well as the Phoenix Project, the DevOps Handbook, and the Shingo Publication Award-winning Accelerate. Since 2014, he has been the organizer and program chair of DevOps Enterprise Summit, studying the technology transformations of large, complex organizations. And this summit is now called the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit. So that's a mouthful. Great to have you on board, Gene, today. Would you like to add something to this introduction? Give you
Oh,
the
what a fabulous introduction. Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that I share a passion with you studying high performers. And back in the early days of Tripwire in the early 2000s, we want to understand these organizations that simultaneously had the best project due date performance and development, that had the best operational reliability and stability in operations, as well as the best posture, security, and compliance. And so the natural question is, how did they make the good to great transformation so we could understand how other organizations could replicate those amazing outcomes? And so that's the journey that took me into the middle of the DevOps movement in the early 2010s.
Mhm.
And I cannot tell you just how much I've learned since then. And so the Phoenix Project came out here during that period, and it's been so rewarding to work with Dr. Steven Spear, on the book Wiring the Winning Organization. And really, it was a quest to understand, what's in common between Agile, DevOps, the Toyota Production System, Lean, resilience engineering, and our conclusion is that they're all incomplete expressions of a far greater but far simpler whole. And so that's what's been so fun to put into the book, and that's what was a 3-year journey, getting out into the world. And I'm so delighted to be here with you today.
Yeah, thanks. And well, we have plenty of exciting topics we could dive into, and but maybe it's nice to start with this book that you're referencing, the latest book that was released, I think last month, Wiring the
Yeah.
Winning Organization. Um, I think it's a great read, and when I went through it, I saw indeed a lot of um, old terms and paradigms and key principles. You mentioned Agile, DevOps, Toyota Production System, all coming together. So in a way, you have been connecting the dots yourself in this 3-year journey in writing the book. Could you give us a little bit background information on the origin story behind this book? What drove you to write it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd mentioned it was the most challenging thing I ever worked on, just because. In fact, maybe I'll tell you where it started. It was in 2014 when I took a workshop from Dr. Steven Spear at the MIT Sloan School of Business. So that's my co-author, and I remember reading his seminal 1999 Harvard Business Review article called "Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System." And
Mm.
so, in part, that work was actually based on his doctoral dissertation at the Harvard Business School. And in support of that work, he actually worked on the plant floor of a tier one Toyota supplier for 6 months. It's just a remarkable journey. And so he extended that work. So he was part of that second generation of researchers deeply studying the Toyota production process. And he extended that work beyond just the high repetition of manufacturing to the building a safety culture at Alcoa, to the design and operations of all of the nuclear reactors for the U.S. Navy seagoing fleet, and so much more. And so, his background, I come from software. He
Mhm.
comes from hardware, and all the domains that aren't software. And we had the suspicion that when you take a look at these kind of frameworks, that there are commonalities, there are common mechanisms in place. And so it was so we started working on this about 3.5 years ago. And what made it so challenging was really trying to tease out, what is actually in common behind these frameworks that are often made to make management leadership more digestible,
Mhm.
but sometimes obscures the key mechanisms at work. And so I think maybe one thing I just want to share is that we do come from different backgrounds, but what was so great is if you take the Venn diagram of the papers we've read, it was actually a significant overlap. So we actually had many common papers uh, uh, that we could reference, right? And that greatly aided in the sort of the dissection and analysis and creation of the three mechanisms of slowification, simplification, and amplification. How am I doing, Rick? John, is this? How am I doing?
Resonating really well. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's great to we'll come to these three terms that you mentioned because I think they're the core in the book, and I think they're awesome in trying to explain in layman's terms how organizations could rewire their social circuitry. But you also wrote in the introduction of the book that the purpose for you to write this book is also to change as many organizations as possible, also by helping its leaders. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so one of the things that we had talked about before, Rick, is uh, yeah, I think one of the things that we're both passionate about is helping technology leaders succeed. And one of my observations studying the technology leadership community, and so that was, as you had mentioned, in the DevOps Enterprise Summit, I ran since 2014 19 conferences geared for technology leaders, not from the tech giants, meaning the Facebook, Amazons, Netflix's, Google's, Microsoft's of the world, but really large, complex organizations that have been around for decades or even centuries, and who are using those same principles and patterns pioneered by those tech giants and using it to help their organizations, compete and win in the marketplace. And just a little bit of trivia: the oldest organization. One of the oldest organizations that presented was Barclays. So that was founded in the year 1673, which actually predates the invention of paper cash. But the oldest organization that presented was UK HMRC, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs Service, founded in the year 1200. So
Wow.
it just, there's probably no code that goes that far back, but there's certainly, values and traditions, maybe even processes that go back centuries. But, one of the things that made it so exciting for me is that if you take a look at the say 20 million developers on the planet, as measured by IDC a decade ago, the majority aren't in the tech giants. The majority, 95% plus, are in large complex enterprises, in every industry vertical. And so exciting to see these leaders adopt these practices, and replicate all of the kind of miracles that we thought were only possible in the tech giants, like thousands of deployments per day, with great reliability, security, and stability. But it's been my observation that often, their success hinged on the support of their non-technology boss,
Mhm.
who often didn't
Yeah.
have a great understanding of what's required to help technology organizations thrive. And so one of the aspirations and goals for the book was to create something that the technology leader can give to their boss, right? To say, we don't need you to be expert in technology, but there are principles that are universal that should hopefully resonate with their own intuitions, experiences, and their whatever made them successful as a leader. They should be able to recognize what helps and what hinders technology leaders to succeed. Does that resonate with you, Rick?
Yeah, it does, and that's what I personally like a lot about these three concepts: slowification, simplification, and amplification. Because I've also seen in the many enterprises I've been trying to help and talking to leaders that there's some kind of allergy or antibodies growing in those organizations if you go too much to a specific framework or make it a goal in itself to focus on certain methods or technologies. And getting a bit more in layman's terms on overarching principles that try to achieve the same thing, but explain also to the boss of the boss in non-technical terms,
Yeah.
like you said, to also target all those non-IT organizations around the world is a great thing to do. And I think it's at least resonated to me, but we'll have to find out, of course, how it does for the average reader. But could you, to make it for our listeners in this podcast, a bit more intuitive to understand what they actually mean, could you, in a few sentences, explain what are the core concepts behind simplification?
Yeah,
So
actually, if I can back up one step, and I think kind of one of our goals was to say, all right, what does great look like?
Mhm.
And one of the things that we tried to articulate was that, there's this magic in winning organizations that somehow are able to fully liberate, everyone's problem solving and creativity and problem solving capabilities, versus those organizations that some of us have been, maybe in, or maybe even created, where that somehow constrain or even extinguish fully everyone's full problem solving capabilities. And so when we take a look at what winning looks like, it's involves making sure that people have independence of action, that they can independently develop and deploy value to customers to help move the
Mhm.
needle on the most important objectives of the organization. And even independence of action, I learned from Steve. It's this term in economics that says, are you do you have the ability to work independently of others, which actually came up in the state of DevOps research as a function of architecture, or is everyone stuck? Stuck meaning a friend of mine, he characterized this phenomena in a large telco, where one of the top initiatives for the organization is to put a checkbox in front of their 20 million customers so they can opt into a $5 a month service to get email or watch movies. The
Mm.
problem is that it's estimated to take 1 year, $28 million, because it has to transit across 40 different teams, and it requires CEO minus one level support, daily war room meetings, and most people think that it has about a 20% chance of succeeding
Wow.
because it didn't work the previous 2 times. And so,
Yeah.
the difficulty here is not the technical work. This is all about the amount of coordination required to do, something as simple as, get a checkbox in front of a customer. And so, that is obviously not so good because everyone is stuck. Um,
Yeah, and I
s-
think that's also the link to the framework, right, that you present, because how to get unstuck, how to become in this winning zone, that's
yes.
what it's all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the winning zone, yeah, we basically say there's really 2 conditions that leaders can create, in the extremes. What is the worst conditions that you are asked to solve problems in? If we can sort of conjure up what that looks like, is probably when is very fast paced. We don't have enough time to think through the problem. We have no inability to undo. In fact, every time that we make a mistake, it has catastrophic consequences. And that's a problem because learning is inherently experiential, is experimental. And so if you can't iterate, the quality of solutions are not going to be that great. And trying to do that in a crisis, right,
Mm.
is very, very difficult. And so really, so what is the opposite of that, which we call the winning zone? It is, how do we create the conditions where you can get multiple trials at bat? You can do this under less consequential situations. You can undo, you can iterate, you can improve. And what greatly enables that is you can see problems when they occur. You can fix them quickly. um, Problems, s- small problems stay small problems as opposed to rippling out and causing
Mm. Yeah,
global chaos and catastrophe.
cool.
Um, and maybe the one thing I'll just mention here is that we're saying for leaders is that there's really 3 layers of work. Layer 1 is where the object in front of us. So it could be the code that we're working on. It could be the binary running in production. It could be the patient in front of us. Layer 2 is all the tools and technologies we use, and often that has teams associated with supporting those. But layer
Mhm.
3 is the social circuitry. So this is the socio part of the socio-technical system. And so as leaders, we are responsible for creating the layer 3 architecture so that people can do their work easily and well. And I just love this quote from Winston Churchill. We shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. And I think that's so true of uh, the organizations and social circuitry. Leaders create it, and then forever after, right, it can shape how everyone in the organization works. So ultimately, they are responsible for the design and operations of that social circuitry.
So,
Cool.
Gene, this is you hit a very important point there. I want to exemplify on is what is the biggest hindrance if for our audience
Mm.
out there, our leaders out there, they're hearing you, right? Okay, Gene, yeah, let's go. But all of a sudden, what's the biggest factor that they're going to run into you that you're finding? You and Steve, what are you guys finding that prohibits me as a member of the audience here from actually doing what you're saying?
Well, I think first part is recognition. Can you recognize the danger zone conditions? is there work happening under highly consequential situations where people are forced to do problem solving in a very difficult mode, right? And so, I think whenever you see world class teams doing something very, very difficult, when it's highly consequential, potentially, dangerous and so forth, you can argue. Absolutely, you can argue, and you must conclude that they couldn't have, that they must have invested effort in planning and preparation, because they couldn't have gotten it right the first time. And so, I think you can make a very persuasive argument, that it's that investment in planning and preparation that allowed them to do what they do. And so, I'm thinking about like high outage cost environments, say at planet scale networks. Uh, you can't the mistakes are so consequential that you have to invest in planning and preparation. That's what we call slowification. And so even if you recognize the problem, you have to invest, make this short-term investment improvement to make for a longer term gain.
Got it. No, thanks. I'm looking at our time, and just going to keep us on track. We got the 4 segments of the show, so if it's okay with you, gentlemen, let's go ahead and move off the. Thank you for the book. I know our readers out there are anxious, anticipating they're going to dive right in reading this. So for the next area here, it's about leaders and their transformation journey, or the journey, right? And so the question we have here for you is, what would be a story that exemplifies, or that you think is a really neat story that really showcases yourself or others that, about that leader and their journey to become that good leader?
Yeah. So one of the things I'm so proud and have such a sense of I'm just honored and I have a sense of privilege of studying is the DevOps Enterprise Leadership Community. Now known as the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit, because these are the courageous leaders who saw that a better way was possible and were able to create this entirely new way of working in organizations that often involved thousands or tens of thousands of technologists, with leaders who probably were quite content to do things the way they've always done it. So that meaning that the what worked for them for decades worked well enough, right? And they didn't share the same urgency to change. And so what I think is so remarkable to see all the creative ways that these courageous leaders could get buy-in to create a coalition of other people who are willing to try this out. And they didn't have 100% win rate for those people who were more concerned, conservative, resistant to change. They were able to find ways to do it despite them. And so I think that sense of and I think what has been so rewarding is to see them being rewarded by the organization, saying these people have the best long-term interests of the organization at heart, and are being given more responsibility. And so, I think these are things I just wish I had learned and been able to study before the Phoenix Project came out, right? Because I can't tell just how much I've learned just from seeing them work, seeing how they model those behaviors, see not just show how they create these amazing technical practices and these great architectures, but also these leadership norms that says here's the way we want people to act and react every day, and so that too is something that we want to get into the book.
Yeah, and I think that's also captured nicely in one of the quotes I like most in the book. I will read it. You read somewhere, to create winning organizations, leadership is more than being inspirational, motivational, direction setting, etc. Leaders must also manage the social circuitry of their organization, and I think that's exactly that you reference to the pioneering leaders that also attended the summit that you organize. They shown vulnerability, that they tend to focus, in at least that's what I assume, a bit more on this social circuitry than just the technology stuff. Is that also how you view it?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, if I can share maybe two things that may have, I'm hoping we're communicating in the book. But for me, one of the things that excited me so much working on the state of DevOps research, so that was a 6-year project that I got to work on with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble. So it was a cross-population study that spanned 36,000 respondents. And one of the top predictors of performance was architecture. And architecture, this really came from Jez Humble, and I learned so much, in this particular finding, which was that, he measured architecture by to what degree can teams work independently of each other without the need to communicate and coordinate and get these vast approvals of. In fact, to what extent can they change their parts of the system without permission from anyone else?
Mhm.
And so, if those things are true, then you should be able to do deployments during normal business hours with negligible downtime. And what that says is that how architecture, the software architecture, has this outsized impact on people's ability to to use our language to do layer one and layer two work. The second thing in fact, so that is what we were trying to channel when we were talking about wiring the winning organization. The
Mm.
wiring is really not just software architectures. It's not just Conway's law. It actually has this. It is actually applicable to the way any organization works. The second thing that we wanted to do was talk about these norms without using the word culture a lot. So I mean, I one of my favorite researchers is Dr. Ron Westrom.
Yeah.
And so we found that the Westrom organizational typology model was also one of the top predictors of performance, and that is whether the organization has these kind of pathological behaviors where we are afraid to tell bad news. We discourage bridging between teams, right? Leaders, messengers of bad news are shot. Whether they're bureaucratic or have these generative cultures. And the problem with culture is that it's so often viewed as gossamer, ethereal, very difficult to pin down. And so, what we want to do is describe social circuitry in a way that an engineer would recognize. So circuits take something that's in abundance in one place and transport it to where it's needed, whether it's an electronic circuit, whether it's plumbing, whether it's a mechanical circuit. And so, what we say is that amplification is all about, to what degree can important signals be generated, transmitted, received, acted upon, and then ideally kind of some fix confirmed. And so, really, the effective, social wiring is
Yeah.
one where even weak signals of failures can be amplified so that they can be decisively acted on, right? So we can better prevent, detect, or correct. So yes, I think I love it just because of very engineering treatment of what people would just normally associate with culture, and yet be able to say, "Oh no, this is just signal and communication theory."
Mm.
How am I doing? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and I think what also is nicely explained in the book, you also related back to the role that leaders play typically
Yeah.
to create such a generative culture, etc. So you also introduced the concept of, next to something like facilitative leadership, you call it center out leadership. You also, I like that term. It's fascinating. A term, incremental leadership, as opposed to the more all-in-one leadership. Could you say a few words on what that means to you and what you mean by
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. This is actually something that was very important to Steve. So often, uh, I think very actually we see this a lot in the technology space where the functional leader is they hold people accountable. They create metrics and then they monitor those metrics and then you create incentives for those metrics. And I think that is true and can work very well in certain conditions. But as you increase the number of functional specialties that must be integrated towards a common purpose,
Mm.
those have those increasingly become very insufficient to achieve the goal. And one of the things I learned from Steve was that it turns out that one of the greatest examples of this is in hospital systems. It turns out that a hospital system in the 1950s was so much easier to run than modern hospital systems. Because in the 1950s, there were basically two functional silos, doctors and nurses, and very little technology involved. So it said that the number of, a handful of functional specialties, whereas in a modern healthcare setting, you might have scores of functional specialties just in the clinician space. Then you have nurses. Even like radiology is actually being that term is being phased out because it's now being called imaging because it's
Mm.
CT scans, MRI
Yeah.
scans, maybe some X-rays. So then you throw in pharmacy, supply chain, technology. It means that there are literally scores of functional specialties that all must work together. And so no amount of incentive setting for one of those functional experts is going to move the needle on the the outcomes that we really care about. So I think this is why we use so many examples from the healthcare
Hmm.
sector to just show how we see these problems happening all the time. But so just a little example. One of the examples that is in the book was when Steve brought in his very young daughter from uh, for a broken wrist, and at first they had to wait in a waiting room for hours. They actually were about to X-ray the wrong wrist because of poor documentation.
Wow.
They she had to get a uh, not a fiberglass cast, but a plaster cast, which is not very kid friendly. And then they had to wait on hold, for a long time for a number for follow up care, which the number they had to get from an outside source. And so this just says that no one has what they need when they need it in the format they need it. And I had a very similar experience. My dad had a stroke where everything was great in the high intensity um, neural ICU, but when he got moved to the non ICU, just again, you saw the same phenomena where the daily rounds, no one had what they needed, and it wasn't a technology issue. It was just how do you integrate, the skills of all these different functional specialties, right? So that you could best serve the needs of the patient.
So being more an incremental leader basically also means segmenting it more, following more also your intuition, I assume, and not try to in a big upfront design way try to yeah, go all in at everything at the same time. Am I correct? Is that what you mean
Yeah,
with examples?
absolutely. In fact, if I can share maybe one
Yeah, sure.
vignette that was in the book that just shows how you don't have to have a very complicated system for these kind of transactional leadership methods to fail. And so we described a scenario where Steve and Jean were asked by the spouses to help renovate an old Victorian house to turn into a hotel. So basically, it required removing three interdependent steps:
Mhm.
removing the furniture, painting the room, and putting the furniture back in. So two functional silos, three interdependent steps. And so Steve and Jean eagerly say, "No problem, we can do it," thinking,
How
what
hard
could
can
go
it be?
wrong? Yeah, how hard can it be? And so it turns out that their attempt to sequence and schedule the work of the movers and painters by using a schedule turned out to be horrendously flawed because not every room is the same. Not every room has the same amount of furniture, and so movers would show up and the painters are still painting, or painters would show up and the furniture's still there. And so movers are now mad at the painters. Painters are now mad at the movers, and they can only agree on one thing: is that Steve and Jean are not very good at their job. And for Jean to say, "We're going to measure the painters based on number of walls painted," Steve's going to measure his team on number of pieces of furniture moved, right, leads to catastrophe. And so
No. Yeah.
uh, the outcome was, let's put the movers and painters into room teams so that there's no need to coordinate or communicate with any other teams, anyone else outside of the room. They have everything they need to be able to start and finish the rooms independently. They have independence of action. They can actually, the movers and painters can actually, by defining handoffs between the steps, they can create independence of action even within room teams. And, you find that they now reside on the opposite ends of the performance spectrum,
Mm.
and with far less communication and coordination needed. And so I think the mark of a great leader is that they can see what went wrong in the first scenario, saying it's not the quality of the movers and painters. It's really about the layer three wiring of, to what extent is that allowing the movers and painters to do their work easily and well? How am I doing?
I think that it resonates because I think in most organizations that struggle or sometimes get stuck in their transformation, you can call it an agile transformation or a DevOps transformation or any nice buzzword. That I think some leaders tend to underestimate this level three wiring, as you and maybe not always recognize where the independence of action and all these other concepts are really going flawed. I have heard many of them blaming again the method or the framework, and then putting allergies for those solutions, while the underlying principles are quite related to what you have been conveying so far. So it's nothing new in that sense, but it's focusing on the actual value that you try to achieve in rewiring your organization.
Yeah, Rick. One of during the review process, I'm so grateful for the people who were willing to read and early copy the book. And the two types of comments that were the most valuable were the big squiggle marks that said, "This is terrible. This is not relevant. This is I don't understand." But the other
Mhm.
ones were the circles of like, "Oh my gosh, this phrase someone was meaningful to them." And one of them was exactly what you said, Rick. Is that someone underlined the phrase, "Leaders often massively underestimate the how difficult it is to coordinate people across so many different functional specialties." And I think what I love so much about that moving painting vignette is that that's a pretty simple setup.
Yeah.
Two silos, not very fast moving, not terribly complex. So just imagine how severely we can screw up a situation in the system that involves more functional specialties, faster paced operations, higher consequentiality, right? You know, less tangible work like knowledge work, right? I think to me that's very persuasive evidence that says exactly what you just
Yeah.
intuited, that this is difficult work, and leaders often are not completely cognizant of how badly they're screwing up the layer three in their systems.
I think that might be a nice segue to the first block of the show, right? Because I think that's the passion we share, all three of us, to how can we guide more and more leaders in their transformation journeys, following these kind of concepts and internalizing those principles, right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, Gina, what really blew me away was the forwarding section of the book, actually. I'm an ex-submariner. So your author, I come from the sub community, right? So I can really resonate. And even when I was on that nuclear submarine myself, back in the engine room doing cleaning the bilge, I'll call it, I was thinking to myself, there has to be a better way. How can we? And so those concepts I brought in, we brought into today, right? And so just like you guys are doing, it's really, to me, it just, anyway, just that was a mind blowing aspect of for me personally. So, but thinking about your career and all the thousands of leaders across the world that you have, just you're helping out, and you have, IT Revolution, and you're paying it forward. So, what from all this, since you can step back and see this great fabric of leadership and what's happening in the world, dynamic world today, for the leaders, we have something coming. Now, we don't know what that is, and I'm hoping that you have that crystal ball and can sort of share with us maybe what you're seeing coming at us. But as that leader, as we're trying to guide others and help others, what can we do to help them on their journey and be prepared? And what do I, as a leader then in the audience, how do I have to prepare myself so that I'm ready to evolve and myself for that future thing?
Yeah, I didn't know that you were a former submariner. That's
Yes,
fantastic.
sir.
In fact, I mean, just to share with you my similar feelings about that forward from Admiral John Richardson, former Chief of Naval Operations for the U.S.
Yeah.
Navy. And so that's a enterprise that spans 600,000 sailors and civilians. And he was a nuclear. He was head of nuclear reactors, the famous engineering organization that's responsible for the uh, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of accident-free operations of reactors at sea that
Yeah.
span decades of responsibility from creation to disposal. So for him to be able to say this book validated his own experiences, not just leading a submarine, but being a leader of leaders, and he's now on the board of Boeing. And so it's my fondest hope that uh, that his perspective, can that he has a unique perspective that as part of a board he holds CEOs accountable, right? He is someone who's so vast experience in leading leaders, and so that was such an important perspective that again I have this incredible sense of honor and privilege that he was willing to write the forward for us. So and I think that gets to the question, John, is that I think for, technology leaders in some ways we need better support from the business leadership counterparts. And one of the things that a dynamic that I loved in the enterprise technology leadership community was not just technology leaders sharing their experience reports, but co-presenting with their business leadership counterpart. And so that business leader is not just cognizant and tolerates the technology leader, but they're the ones who are saying, "I am so grateful for my technology leadership counterpart, because all our goals, hopes, dreams, aspirations, hinge upon my partner. And so uh, I love those because they always model that sort of mutual trust. Where here are two people with two different functional skill sets who are relying upon each other, to help the organization win in the marketplace. And so I think that's another just a great example of what it takes to be a modern leader. It's not about managing my silo, but instead it's how well do I integrate across the organization with the leaders I need to be working with, as well as the leaders above us, right? How good are we at helping achieve important business goals, right? That so I'm not solving just my problem, but my boss's problem, and hopefully even my boss's problem.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
where I want to interject that, Rick, if I can, real quick, and then I'll let you
sure.
take it
Yeah.
there. Is our past? So we had on the show here, we had Tom Garrity, and he was the guy who introduced psychologically safe to all of us, or psychological safety.
Mhm.
And so what I'm getting here from your answer is what I'm feeling is it's a combination of Mick Kirsten flowing value to your customer with Tom Garrity in my ear going, be psychologically safe when you do that, create that environment. And so to me, that really resonates, and that's what we're working with leaders with our end. That those are two elements of that I believe anyways, I just want to share that's what resonated with me when you were speaking, and that to me is a combination of getting those people of how we can get them to work together.
Yeah.
And I had a similar, it resonated with me as well, Gene, because I was CIO at an airline several years ago. And I think looking back, a key reason for being so successful in the transformation we did there, and in the terms of the book, Rewiring the Level 3 Social Circuitry mostly, was because of the alliance I had with the CEO and the other business leaders. I think it helped tremendously to not just focus on the IT teams and optimize in a more local sense, but also jointly, because this whole level 3 flow in the organization is best established if you broaden it outside the scope of just IT. So in that sense, technology leaders are still crucial for bringing innovation and, let's say, technology value in the organization, but they either themselves or by teaming up with their peers in business need to broaden the scope. And I think that's what I see happening in more and more organizations nowadays. Do you recognize that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, and this is something I still don't quite fully understand, but there's something about technology that is so crucial to an organization. And so, like in the Phoenix Project, why is it that almost every major flow of work involves technology, and yet it's often a centralized group with a annual budgeting process, annual prioritization process, and it just seems like in some ways, it's like the worst case organization of anything so critical. Um, given that, it is exactly what you said, right? It is even more important for that leader to be hyper attuned to what the actual organization need, have that high trust relationship, so that you have their trust and confidence that you can do some of the most important things, in the organization. Right? Try running an airline without technology, right? It's not a good day.
And maybe a follow-up question on that, because getting that trust and confidence, would it help to talk less about stuff like lean, agile, and DevOps, and more on generic concepts? We also had a question from one of the listeners in this podcast. He asked Marian, do you experience, Gene, a backlash from organizations towards lean, agile, and DevOps practices? So meaning that agility does not deliver the outcomes it promised us. And is that maybe also the reason, there's maybe a second question, why you relabeled the summit from DevOps Enterprise Summit to a broadly term Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit, or is that not related?
Yeah, I'll give a direct answer to that before answering the first question. Yeah, so it was why did we rename the DevOps Enterprise Summit to the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit? It was increasing feedback from longtime attendees and friends that said, I'm having difficulty getting my friends to go, my fellow leaders, because they don't work on Kubernetes or deployment pipelines. And so something happened, in the last 10 years where DevOps used to mean, how do you break down organizational silos, where it's now been turned into a specific piece of technology that, you can delegate way down in the organization. And it's funny that I think the same thing had happened in the lean community, where people focused up. In fact, it was just on uh, um, an interview with someone from the Lean community with Steve, and they were bemoaning the same thing: is that in the early days, the Toyota Production System and Lean researchers were focused on the management system, and
Mhm.
yet over the years and decades, it focused on the tools, right? And so,
Yep.
I think this is something that just happens in the adoption curve of things. Is that sometimes we lose sight of the problem that we're trying to solve, and so the reason that we um, it was very that was one of the reasons why it was very important for us for the book to be about the principles and the mechanisms of performance to
Yeah.
explain, how can you have something that's for software development, agile and DevOps, and something that's on sort of hardware, manufacturing and fabrication of physical parts like the Toyota Production System.
Mhm.
How can you? What is actually in common? And for that matter, what's in common between that and Conway's law, um, the Westrom organizational typology model, and so we really want to focus on what is it that actually changes as you go from worst to first when the organization transforms, right? What is it that changed, and what exactly did leaders do to make that change? Um, and can I just share maybe one metaphor that we use,
Yeah,
sort of like the
great.
moving
Yeah.
painting thing, and
Yeah.
then show how that drives us, the three
Mhm.
mechanisms? So the other metaphor I'm just very proud of in the book that I'm hoping will be which is what I'm hoping I'll be remembered for, right? Of all the things I've written, I'm hoping that I'll be remembered for this vignette of Steve and Gene moving a couch. And so you might think that moving a couch is just brawn work, no brain work allowed. But it turns out there's actually a bunch of problem solving that must occur. They have to figure out where the center of gravity is to get through a narrow doorway. Around which axis do you rotate? To get down a narrow winding set of stairs. Who goes first, and should they face forwards or backwards? And so what's amazing is that they don't need consultants, they don't need focus groups, to solve the problem. They can just by lifting the couch, trial and error, fast feedback, experimentation, they will probably arrive at the answers quickly. But there's all these things that we can do as leaders to make it very difficult for Steve and Gene to do their job. We can turn off all the lights, right? And that's it makes the work more dangerous. It will take longer. We might damage the furniture ourselves and moving the couch. But we can also introduce a lot of background noise, like a loud siren. And what's interesting is that this makes the problem more difficult in a way that's different than turning off the lights because it inhibits or prevents Steve and Gene from communicating, coordinating. We could put in an intermediary that prevents Steve and Gene from talking directly to each other. We can
Yeah.
make them go through ServiceNow tickets or work orders, or have account managers or contract or lawyers
Been
involved,
been
right?
on that. Yeah. Most organizations tried all the above, I think. Yeah.
Exactly right. And so all of these things might make it actually impossible for Steve and Gene to move, to achieve the goal. And so really the moving the couch is a metaphor for joint cognition and problem solving. And uh and so the whole genesis of the DevOps movement was learning that apparently, like, doing production deployments is like moving a couch. You have this incredible need of information flow, right? And it turns out going through remedy tickets back in those days was not enough to successfully pull off a deployment. You actually had to have Dev and Ops working side by side in order to pull, make a successful deployment, let alone do it, 100 times a day. So um, I think in many organizations, um, you know, everyone is attached. Um, they're not attached to the couch. In other words, they're trying to do things in a way where they're not allowed to work side by side. Or it could be the opposite. You have, like at Amazon in the early 2000s, you have 3,500 software engineers all coupled to one couch, where no one has independence of action. To get even small things done require communication, coordination, scheduling,
Wow.
deconfliction,
Yeah.
prioritization, right? And so what they did is they chopped the couches up into smaller pieces, so that into microservices, so they could regain the ability to independently develop, test, and deploy value to customers. How am I doing?
And does it also mean that if you take it back to the earlier analogy of that the technology leaders love more support from their business counterparts, would it mean that they would need to move couches together in the organization. So bringing it from not just the team level, the example that you shared with the DevOps teams, but also across departments, across divisions.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that in the organizations with the best working relationship between business and technology, that often those business technology leaders are like two in a box. They are they have the same objectives. They go to the same meetings. They can actually, when one can't make it, they're happy to have their technology counterpart attend in their absence. Because they have full trust, right, that they have the same goal, that they share the same goals, and you can't do that. So that is a couch moving activity, right? They are coupled together. What affects one affects the other, and vice versa. Versus when you try to potentially say outsource everything in functional silos, dev to one group, dev test to another group, ops to another group. We're now putting intermediaries between them, and I think what we've learned is that that is not a winning combination, right? Because there's just not enough information flow in those configurations to get the job done.
Cool.
So, Gene, this is bringing up, I think we're touching upon a question here by Alexander. And he's saying here, Gene, in your experience and based on your extensive research in DevOps, what are the most effective strategies for integrating emerging technologies such as AI and machine learning into existing DevOps cultures to enhance automation, efficiency, and innovation while maintaining a strong focus on collaboration and continuous improvement?
That's a great question. Just because I don't know about you guys, but I am having so much fun with generative AI these days. It's
Yep.
just,
Same here.
yeah, it's I haven't had this much fun in 20 years with technology. So could I take a second to maybe define slowification, simplification, amplification, and I can use that in my answer?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Rick, as you were alluding to, slowification is about how do we not do our toughest problem solving in production, but do it in planning and practice. And so, slowification really is a word we made up to, because there's no one word in English that really says, we're doing this not to slow down, but we're doing this to speed up in the long term. So a short-term investment for a longer-term gain. The second mechanism is simplification, where unlike slowification, where we're shifting where the problem is solved, simplification changes the problem so they're easier to solve. And so there's really three ways to do that. One is be more incremental. That should be familiar to any agilist.
Yeah.
There's modularization, which takes a highly intertwined problem and modularizes them so that they can be changed independently. So that's like the famous API re-architecture of Amazon. The third one is linearization. So linearization does what modularization does for parallel processes. It does it for sequential processes. So that's think Toyota supply chain, think assembly lines. So think CI/CD pipelines, right, where we take work that might have been done independently, and we want to put them in lockstep, create very fixed interfaces between them so they can be worked on independently, changed independently, and also automated. And the third one is amplification, right? How do we take weak signals of failure and amplify them so that so we can ideally prevent, detect, and correct. So the assertion is that to get from the danger zone to the winning zone requires only those three.
Yeah. And where would you start then if you would, for example, on an enterprise scale, like the question from Alexander, want to leverage the value AI, for example, could generate?
Yeah, I think there's two mechanisms. One is definitely slowification, right? I think in any learning activity, for things like generative AI, we need time to learn, right? And so the hallmark of a learning organization is that they dedicate time to learn. So it could be as reactive as like the andon cord, where if someone has a problem, you pull a cord and someone comes to help, right? And then there's time to improve the standards. It could be things like hack weeks or hack days, where it's or 20% time. That was at Google, where there's time reserved from daily work that for improvement and learning. So I think generative AI, one of my favorite patterns was generative AI is like things like hack day, where there was a presentation at DevOps Enterprise earlier this year, from the folks at Crows, where they helped an organization. They did it first internally, where they said, we're going to have one day for everyone in this company to pick a project, and we're going to around generative AI, and we're just going to learn from it. And we're going to, at the end of the day, show it off to everybody and share what we learned. And I think it's this is so great, because all the advice that's coming from the generative AI research community says that the first thing to do is to learn how to use it is learn about it so you can gain some intuitions about what is good for, what is not good for, right? And to do this not for the most important projects of the company, but for, small little side projects, something that you can do in one day. So I think that's definitely would fall under slowification. And then the second, I think the second aspect of the answer is, find something that's lower stakes and doesn't involve the entire organization, because just like DevOps was a different wiring than the typical software development lifecycle, I doubt that there were. There can't be very many examples, and I feel like I would, having studied 1,100 examples of these DevOps transformations, they always started small, and the reason why is that you can't impact the whole system when you're trying something new. You have to, in the book, we use the lean terminology of the model line. You pick a small project that is small and self-contained, that is entirely coherent, that have no external dependencies. Right, the couch is entirely self-contained in the pilot project, and I think that's very. There's a reason for that, right? Is that if you're trying to do a small thing, but you have 60 external dependencies, you're not going to achieve your goal. So, I think that the book gives us, some very concrete language of why you do that.
Nice.
Thanks. Yeah. So looking at, so I think we covered that area pretty good. So the final section here before we wrap up is, sharing your leadership journey and paying it forward. So the question I would like to ask here is, what do I have to do is in our audience, if we have senior leaders out there, how do I pay it forward to the next generation of leaders that are coming up? And I think more importantly, for our younger, leaders out there, the next generation leaders, when they're in your organization, and let's say you're not getting what you feel or what your intuition is telling you, hey, I should be being taught this or mentored it. What should those next generation leaders be asking of their senior leaders above them or the organization? How do we pay it forward?
Yeah. I'll give an answer that maybe sounds like a platitude, but I actually feel this very strongly, and it's resonated with my own journey over the last 20 plus years. Someone made a comment that at the DevOps Enterprise Summit earlier this year that his observation was that many technology leaders might be doing their subordinate's job. And I just thought that was super interesting. Because what we really want is for leaders to be doing their boss's job, right? And so the question becomes, how does one do that? And I love the pattern of just shadowing your boss, just asking them to follow them around for the day. So it's one thing to see sort of the key objectives, the KPIs. It's another thing to actually understand, how is the boss spending their time? And, ultimately, that's interesting. I love shadowing people. This is one of my favorite techniques of learning about leaders. But in this case, the goal is to be able to understand, how can, they be most helpful and be able to do as much of their boss's job as possible, right? Not for a Machiavellian reason, but really, this is to prevent the boss from having to do their subordinate's job, right? So that they can do their boss's job. And so I think it really, for me, kind of underscores this almost poetic sense of like, we need leaders, we need leaders at all levels. And so I just see amazing things happening if, people who love solving problems. They love moving the needle on the most important objectives of the organization. They love creating value for customers, to figure out how can they tackle bigger problems and do more of their boss's job. How does that resonate with you, Rick and John?
Yeah, it does a lot, because I think when you also the modern leadership approaches that are getting more and more predominant, at least in Europe, I think you see that there's a tendency to try to build more psychological safety, give more autonomy to the teams that you lead. And if you do this correctly, then let's say your own team number one can be more in line with what your boss is doing, and then you have more time freed up because you can trust your subordinates that they're actually that everything they're responsible for is in good hands. Then you could have a more, let's say, more strategic view, and also see how that social circuitry works and how your role can grow into that going forward. I think that's a great way to look at it. Yeah, thanks for this example.
Yeah, and I think one thing that resonates here is, for me, is I'm gonna say it, the fear, right? You said Machiavellian. That triggered something to me. Is that I've seen too many people, leaders, right? They're afraid to pay it forward because that means they're going to be obsolete, or for many, there's a myriad of reasons, right? So what could we do to make it? How can we put our, those senior leaders in our audience? How can we put them at ease to say it's okay? It's okay to pay it forward to the next generation. Don't be afraid. Any thoughts on how to overcome that internal feeling?
Yeah, I'm laughing, not because it's funny, but because it's familiar to me. I mean, I think it's very true that the agile movement is actually uh, sometimes leaves senior leaders in a sense of angst.
Mhm.
And sometimes I've even heard, if the teams are allowed to pick what they do and how they do it and when to do it, right? What is there left for me to do? And I think that's I'm laughing, but it's not because I'm making fun of them, because it's actually I think a talk about a deep seated question that um, I think at this point now we're putting into question like what they are, their entire sense of self-worth. But I think what I would love to sort of put in that person's head is that no, this frees you up to help you work on your boss's biggest problem, right? Now that we've um, so that's certainly so I think that is so important, right? It's like, what's in it for them? It allows them to make an even bigger contribution, right? Because they're not micromanaging their piece of their functional silo, but instead, they can focus on, the things that really matter. Helping their develop skills within their team, helping their leaders be able to take over more of their jobs so that they can spend more time doing their boss's job, which seems like a very good thing to me.
Although it does require new habits, it is change, right? And I think also many leaders we should not underestimate are inherently not always that open for change. So and it's the angst for losing control and maybe being redundant, but I think it's also being not intrinsically driven for exploring new ways of working continuously. While we all know that there's a lot of opportunity out there as well. Yeah.
Yes.
So guys, as our episode here is, our time, our audience, our time for this episode is coming to an end. As customary in our show here, we give our guests the last word. So Gene, over to you. What is our parting words of wisdom for the day, for the week, for going into 2024?
Yeah. I just love to maybe share what my aspirations were for the book. Was one is just to I love the quote, like anyone can make something simple appear complex. It's far more difficult to make something complex appear simple. And I'm just so proud of what Steve and I did in the book, is really take something as disparate as Agile, DevOps, Lean, Toyota Production System, Resilience Engineering, and put it into something that any leader should be able to understand, right? And be able that the technology leader can give to their boss, and hopefully create a sense of shared goals and a common understanding of how systems work. So that's my fondest goal. And I guess the other thing I would leave is that, oh my gosh, there's just never been a better time to be in the game. I mean, there's especially around generative AI, we are at the frontier of knowing what's possible, and the frontier is continually being pushed outwards. It really reminds me of what DevOps felt like in 2010, where organizations were continually shocking the world of like, hey, we're doing 10 deploys a day at Flickr. Amazon comes out and says we're doing 15,000 deploys a day, and by 2015 they're doing 136,000 deployments a day. It's just whether generative AI is, will have the same sort of economic impact as DevOps or not. I just think it's such a fun thing to explore, both as a leader and as a nerd. And so I just I'm blown away by just how much energy is being invested exploring it. Just because I think that a lot of us have an intuition or feeling that it could be genuinely transformative to how technology organization work, as well as like how the big organization works as well.
Cool. Yeah, I share that enthusiasm, Gene. I think although some of these concepts are more than a decade old, they're easy at first sight, but implementing them in a sustainable way in organizations is an ongoing journey and adventure for many leaders. And I think with your book, the latest book, adding to the list of an impressive list, of course, I think you will bound to get a lot of aha moments for many of the readers, and not just passing it over to their bosses and their peers, but also helping them to connect some dots between the various frameworks, concepts that in most organizations somewhere have been explored already or have tried. Whether they succeeded is another story, but it helps them to advance, I think, the state of the practice further, and that I think is very nice to, and indeed you can be proud of that.
Oh, thank you so much. And Rick, if I could just add one more thing, just to tie generative AI to this work.
Yes.
So as if the job of the technology leader weren't hard enough, it may turn out that generative AI might be important to how we deliver software. And if that's true, we've added one more silo of work that has to be integrated into the technology value stream. So it's not just dev, QA, ops, information security, business, finance, but it's also the crazy, AI, data ops, ML ops, right? That also must be part. So dev has to shift left, they have to shift right in production, further complicating, and adding to the layer 3 responsibilities of what the technology leader is responsible for. It's a great time to be alive.
One reaction I got to do to both you and Rick here on this is, as you guys were talking on this, it reminds me of the internet, the adoption of the internet. So I'm dating myself here, but I remember working with DARPA, the guys at DARPA, when we created, and I was part of that stuff. We were on the forefront of the internet itself. And I know a lot of our audience here is probably going, what? That's a long time ago. But that to me is, you're saying AI, I totally agree. I'm actually going back to those internet days before the internet existed and how we've had to integrate that into our work. So
yes,
cool.
Yeah. So with that, we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of Leaders in Transformation, gaining value and inspiration. Remember that these adoptions and transformations are not just a destination, but a journey. And the decisions that you make today as a leader affect the world for all of us tomorrow. On behalf of Gene and the team here at DASA, we want to say thank you to our audience for joining and hope that you can join us in our next episode of Leaders in Transformation. Until then, lead well, inspire your teams, and don't forget to have some fun as you lead your adoption and transformation.